Hi, I'm Robert Rapier from Consumer Energy Report. I'd like to talk to you today about one of our energy policies, and that is about our ethanol policy in the U.S. Specifically, how we can better grow our ethanol production in a more sustainable way so that it long term is not dependent on government subsidies and government mandates in order to maintain the market. So, to explain a little bit about where I'm coming from when I think about energy policy in the U.S., I want to explain three guiding principles that for me I feel are very important. One is that because fossil fuels are finite and diminishing, and because we rely heavily on other countries for them, we need to figure out an orderly transition away from those fossil fuels. And so, it's not good being dependent upon OPEC. It's not good being dependent upon Venezuela, countries that don't like us very much, who could literally bring us to our knees by cutting off our oil imports. And so it's important to the greatest extent possible that we supply our own energy. Now, as we make this transition, we have to do so in an orderly fashion, and we have to do so in a manner that considers all the trade-offs that we may make. So if we transition from oil to something else, it could be biodiesel based on palm oil. And so there's certain trade-offs there that we need to understand, and some of those trade-offs may be that the rainforest in Indonesia disappears as they mow that down to put in palm oil plantations. So there is no free lunch in energy, and we have to better understand what those trade-offs that we're making are. And we have to make sure that as we transition, we have enough energy to make that transition. So, and by that I mean, we all know that today we need oil. And we know that tomorrow we will need oil, and in 10 years we'll need oil. And hopefully the amount that we need will diminish over time. But because we will need oil in 10 years, we're going to need to do projects today that ensure that we have that oil. So when I see some people protesting every possible oil project in the U.S., I think about that. I think, you do know that we will need oil, right? Where do you think we're going to get it? We have to get it from somewhere. And so I've made some proposals in the past where, the new drilling that we do, we earmark those proceeds toward programs that get us off of oil. And I think that would be a very effective way to use oil to eventually transition away from oil. But it's a fact, even the most ardent environmentalist will have to admit, tomorrow we'll need oil. And we can debate over how quickly we can move away from that oil, but we're going to need it for a little while. The last guiding principle is that it's very important as we make this transition that we take care of the environment, that we take care of our topsoil, that we take care of the air and the water. And so the things that I write and the things that I talk about, they incorporate those principles. And sometimes people mistakenly believe that I'm against a fuel such as ethanol. And I'll give you an example. There are some things about our ethanol policy that I have disagreed with. I don't dislike ethanol as a fuel. Ethanol is a flawed fuel. Gasoline is a flawed fuel. Natural gas is a flawed fuel. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. We have to understand what those are very clearly and how those will impact upon people. So when I write about ethanol's disadvantages or that we must do ethanol in a sustainable manner and not strip mine the topsoil, sometimes some in the ethanol lobby will portray me as an enemy of ethanol, and that is not the case. I would like to see a very strong, thriving, sustainable ethanol industry in the U.S., and one that doesn't require mandates in order to grow and in order to be successful. I'd like to see a very strong economy in the Midwest. My own father is a farmer and a rancher. I feel very strongly about farming in the U.S. and the need to keep that profession alive and going well. And so I support corn farmers, I support the ethanol production, I support the renewable fuel standard. But there has to come a time where that renewable fuel standard is not needed. And so that's what I'm looking toward. So specifically, let's talk about E85 and ethanol in the U.S. Right now, the U.S. is divided up into five Petroleum Administration for Defense districts called PADs. And PAD 2 is where all the ethanol is produced. About 95% of the ethanol in the U.S. is produced there. But most of that ethanol is shipped outside of PAD 2. And so they have to backfill with gasoline. They bring gasoline back into the area and they wouldn't have to if they'd use that ethanol locally. And so that's one thing I'm a big advocate of, is using the fuel as locally as is practically possible. I think Iowa, for instance, could be entirely self-sufficient in fuel. And because it's such an important farming state, I think it would be very, very wise to try to push that state towards the highest level of energy independence possible. I think growing corn, making it ethanol, and shipping it to California when Iowa still requires gasoline to be backfilled is not the smartest thing to do. So in PAD 2, if we replace the gasoline demand there and use ethanol instead, there's about 37 billion gallons a year of ethanol demand that could be had there. And that's almost 3 times what the ethanol production in the U.S. is right now. So if you could grow an E85 market, a strong, thriving E85 market in the Midwest, then you wouldn't require mandates. Now, one of the problems is that the price of ethanol is not always competitive with gasoline, and the price of E85, the differential between that and gasoline is not consistent often enough. The gap is not large enough for people to go buy E85. So we have to do something there. And I think it needs a little, I mean, one of the issues with gasoline is we don't pay the true cost of gasoline at the pump. That's a fact. There are many, many costs there that are not captured at the pump that if we did capture them there, ethanol, for instance, in the Midwest would be more competitive. And so my proposal is we pay taxes. Iowa pays taxes. They pay property taxes. They pay sales taxes. They pay income taxes on both the federal and the state level. So what if you took part of those income taxes and you reduced them, but you shifted that burden into gasoline? So you do so in such a way that you're trying to keep the overall tax burden the same. So you're not increasing taxes, you're just making a shift, but you make ethanol more competitive in that way because you exempt ethanol from that. So in that way, Iowa, which ironically is one of the highest per capita users of gasoline in the United States, could rely more on ethanol for their fuel needs. And they can use their own ethanol. I've compared Iowa to Saudi Arabia before. I've said Iowa is the Saudi Arabia of ethanol. But the difference is Saudi Arabia uses their oil and exports the rest. Iowa produces ethanol, exports it, uses a little bit, but then has to import a lot of gasoline. So with some changes, it could be done on the federal level or it could be done by governors. I mean, the governor of Iowa could put forth a proposal to shift the taxes in such a way that the taxes on gasoline are higher and the property taxes or income taxes or whatever are lower. And so that is a proposal that would grow the market for E85 in the Midwest, in any state that put forward and passed such a proposal. It would grow that market. And that's the sort of thing we need. Now, ethanol is a flawed fuel on other levels. There are other issues with it. I think those are mostly solvable. But we have to work through and we have to solve those issues. I don't think any of us would disagree that gasoline is a flawed fuel. So, you know, in the weeks ahead, I hope to talk a little bit more about some proposals that would possibly help grow the ethanol market in the Midwest and maybe eventually across the United States. But again, it has to be done in such a way that we protect our air, we protect our water, we protect our environment. And you know, that's the big thing, and we can't ignore those issues. The ethanol lobby can't hand wave those issues away. There are some serious issues, and we have to take them on head on, and we have to solve those issues. So with that, that's this week's episode. Thank you for joining me. Please tune in next week.